Great. Good evening and welcome to the third speaker series of the 2021 year. I am Paige Alberg and I work for the Ramsey Washington Metro Watershed District, and I'm also a member of the Shoreview Environmental Quality Commission. And each year we host a speaker series where we have 4 speakers come in to talk about various environmental topics. So tonight, my coworker Matt and I are here to talk about planting for pollinators and for clean water. And our next speaker, I'll talk about at the end of the presentation, but will be in April. And that's our last one for the year. Also will be held virtually, and hopefully next year in January, our speaker series will resume in person in the Shoreview City Hall Commons or City Council chambers. So during the presentation tonight, myself and Matt will be talking with you about planting for clean water, like I mentioned. I'll give you a brief background on the watershed district and benefits of shoreline plantings and other restoration projects, tell you about projects that we have going on in the Shoreview area, and also talk with you about how you can get a similar project installed on your property. And then Matt will be talking about his position as a natural resources technician with the Watershed District and how they've worked on various projects in the Shoreview area and some other projects that we have going on in the Watershed District. And our contact information is here as well as shown again at the end of the presentation. So you can feel free to reach out to us directly with any questions you may have. What is a watershed district? Some of you may be familiar with what watershed districts are, but they're a little confusing, kind of a different entity than you might be aware of. So I wanted to give a brief background on what watershed districts are. So they are a special purpose unit of government. It's a local government that is charged with managing and protecting water resources within a designated boundary. And I'll show that boundary on the next slide, but it's a little confusing. Water does not flow following city or county boundaries. So that's how watershed district boundaries were established. They're set following the way that water flows and the drainage patterns that water takes. And Minnesota is one of the first states to establish watershed districts, which is great because we have so much water. And we found out that because of this water not following boundaries, that sometimes it takes another agency to help manage water resources and problems that happen between city or county boundaries. Watershed districts are managed by a board of managers and help collaborate between those entities to help solve water problems. And then we all have taxing authority that shows up on your tax statement as other taxing authority. Ramsey Washington Metro Watershed District is in the East Metro, covers 65 square miles, and includes all or parts of the 12 cities listed here on the slideshow, including the southern half of Shoreview. And then the northern half of Shoreview is covered by Rice Creek Watershed District, and their website is on the bottom of the page. And they also offer many of the same programs that we offer, including our stewardship grant program that I'll be talking about, where you can get grants to install projects that we're going to be talking about. So you can reach out directly to Rice Creek if you live in that watershed district. And you can also visit our website. We have a "Are you in our watershed districts" page where you can enter your address to make sure that you are within Ramsey, Washington. Otherwise, it will tell you which watershed district you live in. Ramsey Washington Metro Watershed District has 18 lakes, 5 streams, and hundreds of wetlands that we are working to protect, which means we have lots of opportunities to install native plantings and help keep these water bodies clean. As a watershed district, we have a lot of different programs. So I work with our stewardship grant program, and Matt, who's here tonight, works with our natural resources program. We also have water quality staff that do monitoring on lakes and streams for various reporting, whether it's just internal data. So we have historical data for pollutant loading and other water quality measurements, and also for state reporting that we need to report annually to make sure that goals are being met for water quality. We have a permitting team that does permitting. We have rules for stormwater management, wetland management, flood control, and erosion control. So that's for new construction and reconstruction that triggers those requirements. And then those projects have to install stormwater management on site to help us meet our goals for water quality. And then our education team works with schools, churches, Boy Scout groups, Girl Scout groups, other volunteer associations to get um, education out there about water resources and other environmental things, and sets up volunteer activities and things like that so that we can help, again, help reach our goals in the watershed district. And then stewardship grant program, and we talk a little bit more about that. So our grant program used to be called our cost share program. So you may have heard that term for those of you who have either looked into our program or have gone through it in the past. We offer technical and financial assistance for water quality projects and pollinator friendly projects. So these can be shoreline restorations that we're going to talk about today, or other native habitat plantings, such as removing turf and turning that into a bee lawn is kind of the big thing now, which is just getting rid of that standard turf grass that we see everywhere and putting in some native plantings that are better for bees and butterflies and other pollinators. Also, grants can be used to install rain gardens, stormwater reuse projects. We see some porous parking, or porous parking lots and porous driveways as well, to help filter that water and clean it up before it runs off into our water bodies. And these grants can be issued to homeowners. They can go to businesses, schools, churches, townhome associations, condominium associations. Basically, any property owner within our watershed district is eligible. And again, for those of you who are in Rice Creek Watershed District, they also have a similar grant program. So feel free to reach out to them for more information about their program. And funding varies depending on the type of project. Usually it's 50% to 75% coverage. And then larger projects can sometimes be eligible for 100% coverage. So it's definitely worthwhile to reach out to us and see if if your property would be eligible or suitable for a project. And today we're going to be talking mostly about rain gardens and shoreline restorations. I wanted to show this quick slide. Just these red dots indicate where all of the water quality projects through our stewardship grant program have gone in over the last, since 2006, when our program started. And what's interesting is that you can see a wide variety. We have over 350 projects installed through this grant program, which is pretty great. And the Shoreview and Roseville area, up in kind of the northwest part of the watershed district, just started being eligible for these projects because it was incorporated into our district in 2013. So they've had 7 years to install projects, and we've had a lot of people come in, a lot of good projects go in those areas since we took that area into our boundary. And we're excited to see just the interest that comes in throughout Shoreview. People really value water quality and natural habitat. So it's fun to see that area grow in the number of projects, and we're hoping that'll continue to do so in the years to come. So shoreline restorations, we think they're very important, and I want to give you a little background as to why they are. And for those of you who are lucky enough to live on a lake or a wetland, maybe this will inspire you to get out and do a native planting. Reach out to us so that you can improve your shoreline. So not only do shorelines, that you get these native plants in there, and they not only help with water quality, but they help reduce erosion. So the water quality aspect, the plants help filter polluted water that normally just runs straight into our lakes. It helps filter those off through their strong root system, through the above ground plants as well, helps capture some of those pollutants that would normally run into there, and then helps reduce erosion because those roots, in the coming slide, I'll show the root system, but the roots are very, very deep compared to just your turf grass or other invasive plants, non-native plants. Those roots are very deep and help hold that soil in place. It's pretty typical around metro lakes to see people just mow their turf grass right to the lake shore, and that does no good for erosion. You see a lot of those shorelines kind of starting to wear away. So this helps keep those in place. And then with the turf grass shorelines, you also see a lot of geese come in, and then a lot of just other nasty plants, a lot of reed canary grass, cattails, a lot of thistle can come in. So planting native vegetation that grows taller helps keep those geese out of your yards, as well as keep out those invasive plants, get a larger variety of plants in there, and helps keep out that reed canary grass and other non-natives that can come in and kind of take over the shoreline pretty aggressively. Another benefit to having that native shoreline buffer is that it reduces the amount of lawn maintenance you have to do. So we'll talk about maintenance later on, but there is maintenance to a shoreline, but it's less intrusive, less intensive than what is needed for a typical lawn. So a typical lawn, you have to get out there and mow it once, twice a week. Use a lot of chemicals on it, depending how green you want it. If you want to keep the weeds out, might be applying more chemicals. And all of that, if you live on a lake shore, and even if you don't, it still runs off right into our lakes and wetlands every time it rains. So having these native plants helps improve water quality by reducing the need for that. Also improves air quality. Those plants help filter out the air that's coming, air that's around them, and keep that clean, as well as you're using less chemicals for mowing your lawn, less gases being used, so less pollution going out that way. Also, they attract pollinators. Kind of the big thing now is planting for pollinators, attracting bees, butterflies, other birds. These native plantings are good habitat for other wildlife as well. And they have other benefits, just a wide variety of benefits for all the animals around there. Brings in just a lot of fun grazers. They're beautiful is the final step on there. So not only are the plants themselves beautiful, but the wildlife that they bring in. You'll see a lot of these just busy with bees and butterflies from year 1 or 2 from the time they get planted. So that's fun to see and shows that you're having a good benefit on the wildlife in the area. And here's that slide of native versus non-native plants and showing the root structures of them. You can see that the native plants have really, really deep, strong roots that go feet, many feet down into the ground, and help stabilize that soil, help prevent erosion, and then also help filter out pollutants that would normally just flow into the lakes and streams. So really good example of why we should use natives. And they don't have, they do have turf grass on here. Yeah. So you can see that has very, very minimal root structure. So you're going to get a lot of erosion, sloughing of the soil into your water bodies, basically losing your yard. So you have this buffer system in there, and that will prevent that from happening. Shoreline restoration project is a bit of a process. You do need to be committed and willing to put some time and effort into them. Typically, a shoreline restoration takes about 2 to 3 years to become established, but then you do have a little bit of ongoing maintenance after that to make sure they continue looking and functioning beautiful the way you want them to. The first phase that I don't have listed on here, but that's actually the planning process. So your first step would be to reach out to me and start talking about your yard, what you want it to look like, what you envision could be turned into a native planting. And then we can start talking about your plan. We have landscape designers that we work with at the Washington Conservation Districts for those people who live in the Washington County portion of our watershed, and also a landscape designer at the Ramsey Soil and Water Division who help with our planning. So they will talk with you about your yard and put together a concept plan, and then put together an actual construction document that can be given to contractors to bid on the project. And we can help review those bids and help you select a contractor that will be able to do a successful project for you. Once you have the contractor in place, then the fun part starts. So then they can come out and start doing the site preparation. That varies depending on what your existing yard looks like. If it's just a turf grass yard, there's a little bit less site maintenance or site preparation that goes into that. But if you have a shoreline that is overgrown with reed canary grass and cattails and other invasives, they'll have to do a little bit more preparation. It might take a couple times, so maybe a spring and summer visit, and then they can be ready to plant in the fall. So it is a little bit of a commitment, and you want to make sure that you're ready for that and know that your yard may look like that first site prep screen there just for a little while they get ready to plant, and make sure that conditions are right for planting when that happens. The next step is the planting. And Matt will talk in a little more detail about these processes for going through a project. But the planting typically for our projects, we use what are called plugs or larger plants. They just establish more quickly. They're more likely to survive. A lot of times we'll also intersperse some seed in between the plugs as well. Helps it get a more natural look. For people who want a more manicured look, then we leave the seed out and you can just use the plugs. The plug plantings are a little easier to maintain because you know what's going in there, and it's a little easier to pick out the plants versus with the seeding, but the seed does give it a more full look pretty quickly. And then down the road, a couple of years, especially if you use the plugs, you have a very established, beautiful planting. We recommend in that planting photo, you can see maybe in front of those guys planting, you can see a green fence. We call that an herbivore exclusion fence. So typically we recommend using that for about the first 2 to 3 years after the plantings go in, so that you prevent some of the wildlife that graze on these nice, luscious plants from getting in there. So that will help those plants establish more quickly. And then after that first 2 to 3 years, that fence can be removed and your plants are ready to go. We've done a number of projects in the Shoreview area. And for those of you who are listening in from the Shoreview area, I'm sure you've been to the Snail Lake Regional Park at some point. And if you haven't, you definitely should check it out. This area over the last few years has experienced some pretty high water levels, and it's done a lot of damage to the shoreline around the lake and in the surrounding area. A lot of the shorelines were in pretty rough shape. They've been received a lot of damage. A lot of landscaping was underwater. A lot of plants had been damaged, existing trees, things like that. And over the few years that the water was high, I had a number of homeowners that lived on Snail Lake reach out to me interested in doing some sort of restoration project, trying to improve their shoreline and get it back to something they can use. Unfortunately, because of the high water, we weren't able to do a planting. So I kind of kept a list of people, and that list was growing and growing. So finally, we reached out to do a kind of first of its kind project for us, which was a large scale restoration project with the homeowners on Snail Lake. So we, in this case, usually with our stewardship grants, you would give us a call, and I mentioned how we would help you with the plans, and then each homeowner has to hire their own contractor to go through with this. But with this, in this case, we had a number of people interested, so we were able to put the plans together for each homeowner and then hire one contractor to do the work, which was great. So we ended up with 18 homeowners, as well as working with Ramsey County Parks and Rec to do the shoreline restorations that had been damaged by all that high water. The largest stretch, if you go out there, is there's a great area between the boat launch and the newly redone swim beach area. So you can check that out. That was planted kind of late last summer. And then a lot of the shorelines around the lake went in late fall. And they're pretty spread out around the lake. The area on the west around Ryland Lane has the most consecutive plantings together. So if you're able to get out on Snail Lake this year in a boat or paddleboard or canoe, it's pretty fun to go around and you can see the shorelines. And this summer or fall, they'll look really great and be wonderful to see those plantings. So we did a really bad job of taking before and after shots, and I apologize for that. We don't have a lot of those. I'm hoping we can collect some from homeowners as we go throughout this, but basically what you see here was pretty much underwater prior to this planting. And of course, as soon as we started planting, the water started going down, which was great. That made everyone happy, but we sort of knew that would happen. So when we put these plans together, we kept the plantings pretty flexible. We wanted to make sure that we had plants that can tolerate a change in water levels. And that's the good thing about native plantings is they can tolerate periods of droughts and high water. But we wanted to make sure that the plants that we chose would be able to tolerate that high water specifically in case the water comes back up. So we are also providing 2 years of maintenance for this project so that we can help manage these plants. We can make adjustments as the water hopefully continues to go down, but if it comes back up again, we can make adjustments as well. And in the top left picture, you'll see newly installed plantings, those plugs that I mentioned go in. We don't have the fence installed in that one yet, but in the bottom picture, you can see that herbivore exclusion fence around the shoreline, again, to keep that wildlife out of there. And then along the base of the planting, we have a core log or a biolog that's put in to help manage erosion. A lot of, lake shores obviously are used by a number of people. There's a lot of wave action, a lot of boater use. So we want to put that in to help stop erosion and protect those plants while they get established. And then that log will just break down. And again, the fence will come out after those 2 to 3 years. Here, this might be a little bit hard to see depending on your screen, but this, I just wanted to show a planting plan. This is a project, one of the Snail Lake properties. And basically wanted to mention that when we do a shoreline planting, that we want to work with homeowners so that they can use their shoreline and beach area how they want. We don't want, we're not coming in to overtake your yard with native plants. We would love to, but we understand that people want to use their yards. So we work with you to make sure that we can establish your dock access, your beach area, and then use the rest of the shoreline for that native planting buffer. One guideline we tell people is that, and this goes for shorelines, or if you just have a turf grass you're considering turning over to native plants, one guideline we tell people is that if the only thing you do in your yard is mow it, then you're probably a good candidate for turning that over into native plantings. And that's something you can consider if you're thinking about doing a planting and maybe aren't quite sure if you want to give up that yard space or not. Think about how you use it. If you have a picnic area or bonfire area, something like that, make sure you keep that in there and we can incorporate that into the plans. That isn't something we would cover as part of our grant, but we would keep out that like beach area, as you can see here, so that you can work with the contractor to get that installed the way you want. One other thing we don't typically use is retaining walls or riprap, like the rock structures, unless it's absolutely necessary. So if that's something you're interested in or think you need, keep that in mind, that this grant and our work that we do is with native planting so that we can get a more natural shoreline. And then I mentioned briefly about the plantings where we use the plugs. This just shows a typical planting. This is not on Snail Lake because we weren't able to do a planting plan specifically for those, just given the fluctuating water conditions. We had to be a little more flexible and make changes as conditions change. But typically what we would like to do is use a minimal number of plants so that it's easier for people to maintain them. And people who are very savvy at plants, that's where you can use the seed and increase your diversity. Just know that it's a little bit more maintenance, and I'll show you some techniques to keep track of all that too as you go on. But we try to clump plants together so that you have, that the yellow plants are on the west side and then the red plants, so that you can go by color and keep track of those. We look at blooming seasons, what time of year each flower will bloom, so you get a variety throughout the growing season. And then also one thing we always consider and take into account for people is sight lines. We know that you live on a lake or wetland, you want to be able to see that out your window. So we can select plants that maybe get to 2 to 3 feet in height, looking right out your window, and maybe do little taller plants on the sides, things like that, so that we can, again, make sure that you're able to use the lake you want, but we also get the water quality benefits out of the project. Not everybody is lucky enough to live on a lake or a wetland and have a shoreline to restore, but there are other ways you can help clean our water bodies, and that is through rain gardens. Hopefully you all have seen some of these around Shoreview and other cities in the metro. They're becoming pretty standard practice, whether it's through a city street improvement project or just homeowners interested in doing something to help water quality on their properties. Typically, our water from that rainwater that falls on the ground, it runs off into our storm sewers, and it's not treated anywhere. It just runs straight into our lakes and wetlands and streams without receiving any treatment. So these rain gardens act as that initial treatment step. It's hard to see in this picture, but along the curb line, you can see a slight indentation where the water would come off the curb and go straight into the rain garden. We design these typically to treat about the first 1 inch of rainwater, and that is because that's most common amount of rain that we used to see. It's changing now. We're getting some heavier, more intense rainfalls, but that's also pretty much where we get that first flush of pollutants. So that first 1 inch of rainfall is capturing the dirtiest water. It's collecting all the um, pollution, oil, and grits and grime that's on our streets, and pulling that, without the rain garden, it goes straight into our lakes. But with the rain garden, that dirty water is filtered through those plant roots and through the soils. Usually there's an amended sand and compost mix that's put into the rain garden. So that helps filter those out. And we see the biggest benefit of rain gardens right off of the street like that, because that is the dirtiest water. But we also have a lot of projects where people put in, maybe they have a drainage issue in their yard, or are just looking for a way to capture some water and get some treatment, but they can't necessarily put in a curb cut garden. We can look at ways to capture some of your roof runoff or driveway runoff, and still look for opportunities for native plantings to get that in and help clean off that roof water that would normally run into the street. Maintenance. I mentioned maintenance. It's always good to think about this ahead of time if you're considering a project. A lot of times there's some misconception that a rain garden or native planting has zero maintenance, but that's not true. It is less than a typical yard, but there are still some key things to keep in mind. Typically, we tell people to look at some notable dates or holidays on the calendar, to get out there and do some pruning, spring cleanup. Weeding is pretty much what you'll be doing a lot of, especially those first 2 to 3 years as the planting's established. So watching for Valentine's Day, Tax Day, which is coming up, is a good reminder to hopefully it'll be nice out and you can get out and do a spring cleaning. Memorial Day, 4th of July, Labor Day, and then Halloween. If you don't have 2 feet of snow, it's a good time to do your fall cleanup. And each year maintenance does decrease, and it also depends on how manicured you want this to look. If you want it to be more of a formal looking planting or rain garden, that'll take a little bit more maintenance to keep those invasive plants out of the planting area. Another key for maintenance is to know your plants, know what's gone into your planting. We recommend that people take pictures of their plants after they go in. Sometimes contractors will leave little stakes or, like those plantings markers that are in each potted plant. You can have those, keep those handy, or make something a little more sturdy so that you can see those as they go in. And also keep track of your planting plan. We put that together ahead of time for most projects, or whatever contractor you work with should have one. Make notes in the field if the contractor changes things. Sometimes certain plants aren't available, or the contractor says, oh, this plant's not really going to work here just based on conditions, maybe different than the time that the design was in. So keep track of those so you know what went in. And maybe if one type of plant isn't doing so well, you can replace it with something that's doing better. There's a lot of identification tools out there, a lot of apps. A lot of us use the Seek by iNaturalist just to help identify things. Bluethumb.org is another good website to visit just for planting identification and blooming information about certain plants if you want to find out what plants grow best in the shade or sun, and what time of year they bloom. That bluethumb.org is a great tool, as well as these other ones on here as well, to help you identify plants and weeds that are out there. And speaking of that, I want to put in a plug for a workshop we have coming up. It's a virtual maintenance workshop being held by a couple of our coworkers, two of our inspectors who actually go out and do annual inspections on rain gardens and plantings that have been installed through our stewardship grant program. So any of you who have received a grant in the past, you maybe have received an inspection report letting you know how you're doing with maintenance. So this workshop will go over some tips and tricks, as well as plant ID, basic plant IDs to help you with that maintenance. And so you can keep your rain garden and planting area looking great. So there's a link to the registration. We are asking for people to register ahead of time. And then you can tune into that workshop on March 24th from 6 to 7. And now I'm going to turn it over to Matt to talk about some projects in the area.
Hi, thanks, Paige. Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Donay. I'm a natural resources technician at the district, and I'm here to talk a little bit about some of the projects around our district. And with that, I will start with The newest restoration project in the district, which is referred to as Wetland A, it's located in Shoreview and just southeast of Snail Lake. So currently the area is used by neighbors, runners, cyclists, cross-country skiers, naturalists, photographers, school groups, you name it. Really frequently visited by all of those. So prior to the restoration efforts, buckthorn and other invasive species just really blanketed the area. These really suppressed native species and blocked views of the pond and wildlife. There's all kinds of egrets and loons on the pond, and that was just not being seen. And already we're just seeing, I think there's a couple dozen egrets already living on the pond. So that's really cool to see. So the project was broken into 3 phases, each phase taking 1 year to complete. And this map isn't exactly what I'm describing. Due to COVID and some other minor setbacks, we broke it into 3 phases opposed to 2. So the first phase is the kind of the lime green section on the northern part of the map, and that's phase 1. That was conducted in 2019. And phase 2 is done in 2020 during COVID, and that is the left side of the map on the west, that long, skinny, narrow sliver that kind of runs all the way down north and south. And phase 3 will be, it's already underway, but will be hopefully wrapping up in 2021. And that is kind of the eastern and southeast corner of your map there. So in all 3 phases, we removed buckthorn. We cut down a lot of aggressive trees, even if they were natives, like cottonwood, mulberry, box elder. In the northern section, we spread mulch throughout the area that we were going to plant. And that helps, retain soil moisture. There's not a lot of shade in that section. So just retaining that soil moisture was key, especially when planting thousands of new plants. We really wanted to, give them a really good start. So a lot of those plantings were done with school groups, and master gardeners helped with those as well. So once that began, was underway, we really got to teach the kids the difference between where aquatic plants go and, oh, this plant, needs more sun and needs drier soil, so we planted it closer to the path, for example. So it's really cool to teach kids just the difference and the different needs with each species. So after the plantings were done, we continued to weed. We cut buckthorn resprouts. We removed, there's a lot of poison ivy across the whole site, so that's been a really big concern of ours, just with all the public visiting. And yeah, we continued to spread seed, native seed, grasses, forbs, wildflowers throughout the site as well, in the areas that either we didn't have time to plant, or just that were our best spread through seeds. And a really cool thing we got to do was we needed to plant hard and soft stem bulrush in the water, and it grows in 3 feet of water. So it's very difficult to get in with waders, and plant on your hands and knees. You can't really do that. So we came up with a contraption out of a canoe where we fed the plant down through a tube, and then with the end of the tube, we were able to pack these balls, the root balls, into the muck. So that was a really cool kind of creative solution we had to planting there. So each of the 3 sections pose different challenges, like I just mentioned. They each contain different habitats and soil types, different invasive species we need to look out for. So just that creativity and keeping an open mind has been really crucial the whole time. Okay, so the district definitely didn't do this all alone. Ramsey County has been a huge partner through the project, and they provided a lot of resources that were crucial to the process. They have a lot of equipment and machinery that help spread the mulch, for example, and bring in plants and things like that. So a lot of our plants were from the Ramsey County Correction Greenhouse. So we've gotten thousands of plants from them. They're very good quality. There's, a huge success rate with planting those. So yeah, they've been a huge partner throughout this process. Engaging with the public has been just a primary goal through the whole project, start to finish. We have, worked with school groups, master gardeners, master water stewards, and our own citizen advisory committee. And they've all helped with over a dozen planting events at Wetland Day. And so COVID did diminish the planting a little bit. Natural resources staff did step up to the challenge, and we planted over 10,000 plant plugs in 2020. And we did that either on our own in small crews or with, socially distanced volunteer groups. So small groups of 5 to 8 people. So that was a big accomplishment for our crew, is planting the same number of plants despite COVID-19. So in addition to the engaging with the public and furthering the education with the public, we're working on a sign project. So we're going to be installing permanent signs and semi-permanent signs in place of the temporary signs that were placed in 2020. And with that, we'll have QR code scanning to take you to an iNaturalist page, and you can read all kinds of information about the plant, where it grows best, like would it grow well in your garden, what kind of soil it needs, what kind of sun, everything like that. We're gonna have close to 100 unique native species ID'd on the site, as well as 4 permanent informational site history project detail signs that'll be going in on the site as well. And just a side note, the photo above was taken in the summer of 2019, so that was pre-COVID, pre-masks. So just wanted to point that out. And that is our coworker Simba, teaching a school group just the planting process, just the different things to do to make sure that the plant is successful. So from Shoreview, where Wetland Day is, down to Maplewood, the district has over 15 restoration sites, anywhere from just 1 or 2 years old up to over 20 years old. Lake Phelan, Keller Creek, Casey Lake, Keller Golf Course, and now Wetland Day are some of our larger projects, and these restorations were installed with partners at both the city and county level. So one example is Lake Phelan, that left picture. The restoration around Phelan brought just a wide variety of pollinators and significantly reduced all the erosion that was happening around the lake. It was just huge washouts, and yeah, just erosion was happening at many points around the lake, and now there's next to no erosion. There's plants, native species all the way down to the shore, and then even emergent plants growing right at the shoreline. So that's really good to see. And then the other example I have here is Keller Golf Course, and that contains over 26 acres of restoration sites. And what that has done is it's resulted in less mowing, fewer chemicals are needed, and all rainwater that falls there is captured and reused to water the lawn. So there's also just a reduction in the water needs there. And just a cool side note is it's now a member of the National Audubon Society. I believe there are over 100 bird species that have been recorded at this golf course. So that's really amazing. That's just a super unique golf course nationally, not only locally, but it's a nationally acclaimed golf course just for those reasons. So once installed, natural resource staff continue to maintain these areas just for the years to come. And what that looks like is natural resources staff returns multiple times a year to monitor. We perform just routine maintenance like weeding, planting. We do prescribed burning on a scheduled, and reseeding, replanting is needed. Just all about coming back regularly and keeping an eye on it.
I'll unmute. Okay, thanks, Matt. Now you've heard from Matt and I about these great plantings and why they're so wonderful, but we also have had the opportunity, like I mentioned, to work with a number of Shoreview residents, which is wonderful on some of these projects. And through our stewardship grant program in 2019, two Shoreview residents, Chris and John Hoffman, were um, really fun to work with, and they installed rain gardens with native plantings on their property. And they're actually looking at doing another project this year, which is fun. And our communication team was able to interview them and put together this great video on YouTube. It's about 5 minutes long. So if you have time to watch that, please stick with us to watch that and listen to Chris and John talk about their projects and the benefits they've seen throughout this process.
John and Chris Hoffman, and we moved here in 1989, so coming up on 31 years.
Well, the main thing that really has been a difficulty, quite frankly, in our yard all along for many, many years is that we are the low point of our neighborhood. And so we have a very wet lot. This used to be a creek, evidently, even here. So it's always been difficult, really, to grow grass here anyway. And, another motivator for us was when the city put a sidewalk in front of our yard last year, and John really did not want, and I didn't blame him, to be dealing with 3 foot of turf alongside the street, and that area floods quite often whenever there's a heavy rainstorm anyway. So it seemed really natural. I think that was actually the thing that sparked all of this was, he said, what, I'm going to put something native there that isn't going to need a lot of attention, and that kind of blossomed into then the rain gardens as well.
That's right. It was the sidewalk project that really got things going. But it was easy for me to find the grant application materials on the Watershed District, and I applied, and Paige from the Watershed District came out and met with me along with Michael from Ramsey County, and kind of went from there.
One of the things that they wanted to do was be able to dig this and then put layers in there so that all the water off the roof would funnel into these twin rain gardens and just kind of help avoid all the runoff that went down, out onto the sidewalk and onto the street, which also, wasn't good for the grass. The other landscaping plants didn't like it, and I think it's been working beautifully.
So we have 2 rain gardens. You can really only see the one right here on the east side, and it's connected to a downspout. Right over there is almost identical twin on the west side. It's connected to another downspout, and it's deepened up with enough engineered levels that so far every rainfall that we've had, it's been completely drained and dry within 24 hours of the rain stopping. And we haven't had really monsoons here yet this year that I'm aware of, but we have not had any overflow yet. It's always been contained within the 2 rain gardens.
I would say my understanding was really limited until we started this project to what I do in my organic vegetable garden on the other side, and the benefits of, that process to pollinators. And I haven't really extended my thoughts much beyond that into, other things that we can be doing to encourage, native plantings or encourage, support pollinators. So it's been fun for me, for sure, to learn about all of these different plants and to see what's been successful. And I'd say too, I think some people might have, only one idea of what a rain garden could look like, on their property. And I for one was a little bit, more sensitive to making sure that it, worked good in our yard and that it worked good in our neighborhood. And I think we've been, gotten so much positive feedback from neighbors about how beautiful the gardens are, and probably a little bit different maybe than people, might have been worried about. And certainly that I was a little bit worried about when we first embarked on this project.
One thing I'd like to say is a big driver for me is after 31 years on this lot, I started to think about turf and how resource insensitive it is. Starting with buying the sod and the landscaper put it in, You know, we have an irrigation system that costs a lot of money, and then ongoing every year, the fertilizing, the weed killing, the weed pulling, the mowing, the raking, the seeding, the watering, just tremendous resources, particularly with all the chemicals involved. I was unhappy about it. And quite frankly, I think it's kind of boring, you know, compared to what's available with the native. And then you look at externally what it means to the environment and the pollinators and our lakes and things. And to me, I thought the native and the rain garden is something we should have never got away from, but we did, and now it's coming back.
And as I mentioned in the start of the talk, our next Shoreview Speaker Series will be in April on the 21st at 7 p.m. Again, it'll be a pre-recorded session, and it is a talk from two U of M professors, Dr. Nick McCann and Dr. Jeff Miller, talking about a urban fox and coyote study that they have going on. And if any of you, so I live in Shoreview and I'm on next door, and I see how many coyote and fox posts are posted almost daily. So I think there's a lot of interest in this topic. So I encourage you to listen into this and hear what they have going on at this study if you're available next month. And these are all posted. You don't need to watch them live. They will be posted on the City of Shoreview website, so you can watch them afterwards as well. And with that, I want to thank everyone for listening in. And if you have any other questions, or if you're interested in pursuing a stewardship grant project, feel free to reach out to me. If you have project specific questions, you can reach out to Matt as well if you have questions about work that our natural resources crew have doing. And thank you for being here.